God's promise to David. After the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent." Nathan replied to the king, "Whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you." But that night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I have been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Wherever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?' Now then, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, and appointed you ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and I have cut off all your enemies from before you. Now I will make your name great, like the names of the greatest men on earth. And I will provide a place for my people Israel, and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own, and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them any more, as they did at the beginning, and have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also give you rest from all your enemies. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son."
At long last, Israel was at peace. It's hard to explain what it was like between Israel and the Philistines. They weren't neighbouring countries, but two distinct peoples living in the same land. Think perhaps of Northern Ireland, with unionist and nationalist areas, towns and villages. Generally, the Philistines had the upper hand. Under Samuel, Israel had faced the prospect of extinction, but Saul had fought back, stabilised the position. After him, David drove out the Philistines, capturing Jerusalem and renaming it the City of David. And now, after 60 years of continuous conflict, the land is at peace. And David begins thinking about building a temple for the Lord, who had overseen his victories. Nathan, the prophet, knows that David is a godly man and encourages him to continue with his plans. Then the Lord tells Nathan otherwise. David was a good man, and he had a good plan. Even the prophet thought so. But the plan wasn't to be fulfilled. God wanted things otherwise.
You The Gospel reading is taken from Mark chapter 6. Jesus feeds the 5,000. The apostles gathered round Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout that whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And everywhere he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed.
Like David, Jesus and the disciples had a plan too. Jesus sent the disciples out to proclaim the good news. It goes well. Many people respond, and the disciples return to Jesus full of excitement. But they are also exhausted, so pressed about by the crowds that they don't have time even to eat. Let's go away somewhere quiet for a while, get a bit of peace, be renewed before starting work again among the people. It was a good plan by a good man, but it doesn't work out that way. The people have a different idea, and they hurry round to where Jesus and the disciples are going. When Jesus sees them, he can't ignore them. His heart goes out to them, and he heals them. Good plans by good people, but they don't work out as they'd expected. But something else did, and in its own way, something better. David's son, Solomon, built the temple. Jesus and the disciples don't get their rest, but people receive healing, hear God's teaching, and respond to the good news. Well, today is a special day for me, an anniversary of a sort. Not of a wedding, but of leaving full-time ministry to become non-stipendiary, earning my own living 19 years ago today. When we came to our first parish, after I'd served my curacy, I thought 6 years would see Ed through school, and then perhaps we should consider moving on. Good plans, I think, made in good faith. But not what happened. We stayed only 3 years. I spent much of those 3 years training non-stipendiary ministers, unpaid, self-supporting clergy, drawn from the parish community. It convinced me of the value and importance of local ministry. I'm very dubious whether bringing in full-time professional clergy from outside to run parishes is the right way to go. The church belongs to and is an expression of the community of which it is part. The diocese should provide resources, training, encouragement, guidance and advice, but the business of being the church belongs to the people who are the church. We have among us the skills, the gifts and the faith needed to serve and worship God. The practical skills of maintenance, administration, the pastoral gifts, the gifts of leading worship, all are here. And it has been heartening to see them being used during the interregnum. As the body grows in confidence, you discover that you don't really need anybody to live in a fancy house and be set apart from the church and the community. You will always need people to break bread and give a blessing, but they can and should come from among the body. You don't have to be especially clever. You just have to love God as best you can and want that love to show in how you live your life. That's still my vision, whether it's Dorset or Devon or anywhere, and it's hard to see how I could have continued in stipendiary parochial ministry when I'm not really sure that I believe in it anymore. That doesn't mean that I've lost faith in the gospel. I still believe in the promise of God for redemption in and through Christ, not just as my only hope, but also as the only hope for the whole world. I still believe in the church, and the Church of England at that. We will probably always need full-time clergy to act as rural deans, archdeacons and bishops. We still need, always I think, full-time docents, teachers, trainers and administrators. But I look for a time when each congregation, supported and encouraged by the wider church, will take responsibility for their life of worship and service at the local level. I still believe in the ordained ministry, but I also believe that what is grown in its native soil is more likely to thrive than what is imported from elsewhere. It was so in the earliest days of the church, and it brings an integrity to our common life together when others can see that our life of faith is something that we do together, not something that is done to us or on our behalf. Well, I probably haven't convinced you, and Lydia Cook will have my prayers and support as she comes here to work amongst us. But I will also pray that every member of the church will share in God's service by continuing to seek out and develop the gifts in ministry that we all have as individuals and as a church. Over the past year and more, Elizabeth and I have avoided all indoor gatherings, including the church. The current rapidly growing infection rate and awareness that vaccination is not a guarantee of protection from the virus and long COVID means that it seems right to us to continue that way for a while yet. We think that's the right decision, but recognise that we could be wrong. That may witness to a degree of confusion on our part, but not to a lack of faith. And that uncertainty should not surprise us and should not worry us. It is extraordinarily difficult to know God's will, his purpose and plan for our lives. We don't always have a Nathan who can guide us. More often we find ourselves buffeted, doing the best we can, uncertain of the path to tread, but trying to be faithful. What if? What if Jesus and the disciples had turned around in the boat when they saw the needy crowd in order to get some peace and rest? Would that have been responding to God's will? Who knows? Sometimes God does reveal himself clearly to us, but most of the question is not so much, is this or that the right way forward, but given where and who I am, and the circumstances I find myself in, and the people who are around me, what is the most caring, the most loving thing to do? How can I live my life with integrity, faith, and hope? It's a messy business, but I think it reflects the reality of the world that God has made with all its confusion and uncertainty. And remember, the ultimate temple for God was not built by David, nor by Solomon. That temple is still being built today by all those who join themselves to one another in the love and service of God. That is the life to which we have all entered by our baptism and our continuing membership of God's church. As we live our lives faithfully together, we build the temple, ordained and lay, men and women, old and young, going about the ordinary business of our lives, but lives made extraordinary because through us, in all life's confusion and uncertainty, God still reaches out to embrace and heal the world.
God is working his